Hello, everyone. I'm Meg Rotzel, curator of exhibitions at the Radcliffe Institute. Welcome to today's opening program for Water Stories, River Goddesses, Ancestral Rites, and Climate Crisis, which is now on view at the Johnson Coolacundis Family Gallery through December 16th. Today, we'll be joined by the curator of the exhibition, Jinah Kim, the Johnson Coolacundis Family Faculty Director for the Arts at Radcliffe, and the George P. Bickford Professor of Indian and South Asian Art and Professor of South Asian Studies in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences, together with Yukio Lippit, former Faculty Director of the Arts at the Radcliffe, and the Jeffrey T. Chambers and Andrea Okamura Professor of History of Art and Architecture in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I am glad to welcome all of you into this space together where we will discuss water stories. While Jinah has been organizing this exhibition, I couldn't help but connect the work we were doing in the gallery with our everyday lives. Throughout the exhibition making process, we've had a series of conversations that not only drew upon the global headlines and local weather patterns, but in the ineffable shape of water and its place in many cultures. Just think of the expansive subtitle of the show: River Goddesses, Ancestral Rites, and Climate Crisis. The multivalent subjects of this exhibition reach across time and place, requiring a curator like Jinah to sift through collections of art and inspire dialogue. And I want to express our thanks to the Harvard Art Museums, along with the Peabody Essex Museum and their staffs. It has been a group effort to pull these works together that range from documentary photography, a series of Indian paintings, and contemporary prints and artworks. The stories told in the exhibition required the collaboration of so many, and we're grateful to our partners in this endeavor. In this online program, we are physically separated from each other, but we will be welcoming you into the gallery with some special programs. You'll have the opportunity to spend time with contemporary artists who will share their perspectives and practices, including Atul Bhalla, the Mittal Institute's Climate Initiative visiting artist, Alia Farid, a current fellow at the Radcliffe Institute, and Evelyn Rydz, faculty at Mass College of Art, who created a stunning new work for the exhibition. We'll be hosting an in-person panel on October 13th, and you'll have a chance to meet these artists in the gallery individually throughout the semester. You may visit Radcliffe's website for more about these opportunities, and I want to stress that you and your own water stories are of utmost importance to this exhibition and the scholarly website that Professor Kim has created. There is a portal on the website in the gallery, and we encourage you to visit, learn more about the works on view, gather resources, and share your own water story. Before we get started with today's program, I'd like to give you an overview of what we'll do within the hour. First, Professor Kim will share images from the exhibition and some of her own thinking behind her selections. Then she'll be joined by Yukio Lippit for a discussion. And before that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who are watching this afternoon. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. We also want to acknowledge the Johnson Coolacundis Family Endowment Fund for the Arts, which is supporting the exhibition. We encourage those watching on Zoom to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions at any time during the program, and the speakers will address them as they can. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, we ask that you keep them short. This will enable us to address as many as possible in the time we have. Please keep an eye on the chat feature of the webinar, where we'll post a link to the beautiful website developed to complement the exhibition, as well as the links to register for upcoming in-person events with the artists whose works that are showcased in the exhibition. And now it's my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Jinah Kim.
Thank you, Meg, for that wonderful introduction. So, hello everyone, thank you for joining us. As Meg introduced, my name is Jinah Kim, and I'm delighted to share with you a little bit about the exhibition at Radcliffe I curated, Water Stories. And before sort of telling you about the exhibition, I'd like to start by my presentation by thanking everyone that helped make this exhibition come to life. Of course, the exhibition would not have been possible without the support from the Radcliffe Institute's amazing academic ventures and engagement team, Becky Wasserman, Don Pandit-Fluffle, and of course, the Johnson Coolacundis Gallery coordinator, Joe Zane, and the curator of exhibition, Meg Rotzel, who is here with us today. And of course, as Meg mentioned, Harvard Art Museums and the Peabody Essex Museum for graciously loaned their precious objects to our exhibition. I thank them both. And I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Aishin Yoltar Yildirim, Norma Jean Carterwood, curator of Islamic and later Indian art at the Harvard Art Museums, for taking up on the theme of water and climate change for the rotating permanent gallery exhibitions at that museum. So if you're visiting our exhibition at the Radcliffe Institute, I encourage you to check out the second floor Islamic and later Indian art galleries at of the Harvard Art Museums. Dr. Siddhartha Shah, now the director of the Mead Museum of Art at the Amherst College, facilitated the loan of M.F. Hussein's Mahabharata series in the Peabody Essex Museum's collection to our exhibition. I thank him dearly. And I got help from many colleagues doing research for this exhibition, including James Westcott Jr. and Vishal Khandelwal. Thank you both for sharing resources so generously. And my brilliant graduate students helped me every turn of the research. So Nandita Punj, Sonali Dhingra, Louis Popplestone, Vaishnavi Patil, Victoria Andrews, and Raghunath Akarsh. Victoria and Akarsh actually accompanied me on a trip to India last December, visiting important pilgrimage sites, documenting ritual activities around the sacred rivers of India. This exhibition explores an ambitious transhistorical temporal span, and I benefited greatly from working with Toby Wu, a graduate student research assistant at Radcliffe from the Film and Visual Studies doctoral program at Harvard. The exhibition, as Meg mentioned, also has an accompanying website, which I will talk more about momentarily, but I would like to give a shout out also to the Arts and Humanities Research Computing team and the Faculty of Arts and Science at Harvard, and the website's amazing designer, Alia Farid. So, the Water Stories exhibition is about water and climate crisis. Let me just start by telling you how it came about. So I started thinking about doing a project on art and climate crisis, focusing on water in 2021 while preparing to teach an undergraduate lecture course in my home department, History of Art and Architecture, titled Art of Monsoon Asia, Interconnected Histories. I got quite interested in exploring how water is represented in art because this analytical focus on water can help us understand the relationship between human and nature during the period when the artwork was created and can give us insights on ecological and climate conditions of each period. Water is essential for all life on Earth, but what water means to us as humans is culturally specific. And I'm always in awe of learning about ingenious approaches to harness nature, in this case, water, to transform the man-made into the sacred and to manifest a mythological story in a physical, real, lived world. So I proposed this exhibition during spring 2022. And in the world of curation, about a year lead time is a very short turnaround time. And I guess I was confident that I can count on my colleagues at the Harvard Art Museums and the Peabody Essex Museum to help me mount this exhibition. So the exhibition is divided into 5 thematic sections. The opening section is called Fetching Water, where we have historical photographs from colonial India that were used as character visit, pocket-sized photographs that were collected and traded widely in the 1860s onwards. Collected as souvenirs, these colonial era photographs exoticize the subjects. Here we selected images of women with pots to remind, or water jars, to remind us the continued challenges of securing clean water. So living in the city, at least speaking for myself, we get our water from tap, but even today, women in the rural areas of the global south walk for an average 3 to 4 miles to fetch water, often barefoot. In this section, you will also see actual examples of water jars, water pots that are used in rituals that we collected in Varanasi in India by the Ganga River. This second section introduces the river goddesses, starting with this image of the goddess Ganga, who from early on was identifiable through a few distinct attributes, including a pot in her hand and her vehicle called Makara, a mythical aquatic creature. And here they look like a domestic animal. While Ganga and Yamuna pairs are common in medieval Hindu temples, iconographic program, I couldn't find any historical examples in the Harvard's collection. But luckily, we have the Indian modern artist, M.F. Hussain, whose Mahabharata series in the PM collection have this piece with the two holy rivers, Ganga and Yamuna, as represented here as damsels flowing opposite directions. The next section is called Flowing Stories, and here we have 3 historical works and 3 works by the contemporary artist, Evelyn Rydz. And I don't have time to tell all the stories that are flowing in this section. I'd like to point out that these 3 18th century paintings from India in the exhibition belong to a set called Ragamala, a garland or compilation of ragas or musical modes in which each painting represents music's mood and melody through figurative means. So here, the Bhairava raga is traditionally the first raga a student of classical Hindustani music learns, and Bhairava is a wrathful form of the Hindu god Shiva. Unlike most Bhairava raga paintings from this period, the painter, we know his name, Jaikison, took a unique approach to representing this raga, as Shiva and Parvati, his consort, in one body in the form known as Ardhanarishvara, literally the Lord who is a woman, to dancing. That this is the auspicious beginning is signaled by the stream of water pouring down from the lock of hair, invoking the story of the descent of the Ganga River. The Ganga used to be a heavenly river that came down to help a Brahmin sage by the name of Bhagirath, so he could do the proper ancestral rites to send off his ancestors. The contemporary artist, Evelyn Rydz, picks up the vibrant colors of the 18th century Indian painting and tells her stories. Her painstaking rendering of disintegrating marine ropes subverts rapid cycles of capitalist consumerism polluting our waters. And this work was created for the exhibition in response to the Ragamala paintings. Rydz's paper sculpture, Outflux 2023, creates a new body of connected waters, generating new stories of immigration, migration, and climate change. This site-specific paper sculpture is truly marvelous, and it's a must-see. And I have to say, Evelyn really went above and beyond in making this water literally manifest inside an art gallery flowing from the wall. Although Evelyn Rydz and Jaikison are nearly 300 years apart and more than 7,000 miles away on the opposite side of the globe, I hope visitors to the exhibition can see their shared artistic ethos, such as meticulous approach to rendering small details and creative use of brilliant colors, and consider how their works make us see the shape and the color of waters and hear the stories that they each tell through their art. And this flowing water section is followed by small section with black and white photographs that show challenges water poses in poorer communities to acknowledge the impact of climate change in greater is the fact that impact of climate change is greater in economically disadvantaged communities, whether in the global south or global north. So this amazing photograph by American photographer Eugene Richards just doesn't do justice to see it on screen. It's really visceral to see it in person. The only water visible in the frame is a drop of tear rolling down the man's cheek. Yet if we can feel the weight of the mighty rain that brought destruction to his farmland. The next and the last section in the exhibition is titled Into the Water, and we move to action from stories. Here, New Delhi-based visual artist Atul Bhalla ritualistically submerges himself slowly into the Yamuna River, alluringly captured in a set of 14 serial photographs. This piece is actually the one that made me boldly propose the exhibition in the first place, because I knew this work is in the Harvard collection, and also because I knew about Atul Bhalla's continued engagement with environmental issues, especially focusing on the Yamuna River, which is known today as the most polluted river in the world. And I thought I have my key piece to think with in planning this exhibition on water and climate crisis. And in fact, Harvard Art Museum has another piece by Atul Bhalla, which is on view on the 4th floor of the museum. And I was delighted to learn about Alia Farid's work from Radcliffe's curator of exhibition, Meg Rotzel, who's here. And we're very lucky that we're showing her newly completed video piece, Chibaish 2023. Chibaish is a marsh in Iraq near Alia Farid's paternal grandmother's hometown is located, where severe drought and political instability has caused climate displacement of all species. And I think Meg can tell us more about Alia's practice, perhaps during the Q&A. We initially intended to show both Chibaish 2022 and Chibaish 2023, but we're now only showing Chibaish 2023 in the gallery. But if you stay tuned to Radcliffe announcements, we'll have a limited release online screening of both pieces coinciding with our in-person event in October. And they will be shown in the exhibition website. So if I can have like 2 more minutes, I will tell you about our website. So as mentioned in the beginning, the exhibition has an accompanying website where you can read more about each work, each artist, and a few thematic essays. This is sort of the landing page. And you can also sort of turn on the sound to hear the sound of the music. And the essays will sort of show you the thematic essay that tell additional stories that inspire the exhibition. And if you go to works, you can see and read about all the works in the exhibition. So this is sort of the sections, and each section will show you the works that are in there. The bios section will show you the information about participating artists. And the resources section, which I'm really excited about, has curated lists of resources, including the one on art and climate crisis created by Vaishnavi Patil, and resources on climate change in global south created by Victoria Andrews. There are many, many interesting climate-related projects out there, and here you have a curated selection that we recommend you check out. But most importantly, what I'm most excited about this website is having you participate in the storytelling. So there is a share tool where you can tell your own story, and you can see them on the map. And you can also filter those stories by categories. And we, for instance, last night we had 3 stories of quotidian nature, and each story, what it looks like is, like somebody reported on flood at Fenway. So, and the list view will show you and you can also share the images. And there is also a word cloud made up with your answers to the question, to you, water is. So I hope you will contribute your own water story to the project and be part of this virtual community. So that's all I have to say for now about the exhibition and exhibition's website. And I'd like to ask Kyo to join us and also lead our next segment of today's program.
Thank you, Jinah. I'm Yukio Lippit, and I'll be leading a moderated conversation with the curator, Jinah Kim, and Radcliffe's curator of exhibitions, Meg Rotzel. Now, this is Water Stories, an exhibition that focuses on, you might say, water and the challenge of the representation of water. Water is everywhere and therefore nowhere. In the era of rapid climate change, it's increasingly an entity marked only really by its absence or scarcity or its overwhelming presence, kind of one extreme or the other. It's a subject of crisis. And one could say that, among other things, the exhibition kind of conveys this idea that water needs to be defamiliarized or estranged somehow from its ubiquity, from its crisis, and re-enchanted as a vital part of consciousness in some way. And nothing does this better than art. Now, Jinah, you're a specialist in South Asian art, and your curatorship here is focused on a combination of South Asia-focused traditional arts with many other things dynamically arrayed in the gallery. I mean, it's a really dynamic exhibition with documentary photos from local collections. There are works by modern and contemporary artists. There is a specially commissioned installation. There is a video. It's multisensorial. Could you talk a little bit more about your curatorial rationale behind this approach?
Well, that's a great question. And my immediate response would be there isn't really one, except for the time constraints. The year lead time limited the corpus that I would work with, and it had to be things on which I could easily mobilize my own expertise. But on the other hand, as you said about sort of, refamiliarizing ourselves, I thought it is important to tell water stories from South Asia in this setting that is a contemporary art gallery at Radcliffe that caters to broader audience, not just those interested in South Asia, juxtaposing contemporary artists with pre-modern works of art from South Asia and documentary photographs, because I think they give us alternative frameworks to talk about water and climate crisis. Water is so everywhere, it's ubiquitous, and we rarely question our relationship with water. And I wanted to draw people's attention to different ways of being with water. And all the works chosen for this exhibition, in a way, do this. And also, there is, of course, a long history of juxtaposing waters of the greater Boston area and India. In the Walden, Henry David Thoreau talks about this vision of the Ganga water and the Walden pond water mingling together. Here is actually not actually far from the reality, because ice harvested from Walden were sent to India during Thoreau's time. And I like to actually flag that this reference I learned from reading Jim Westcott's architectural historian Jim Westcott's work. So yeah, I got to learn about a lot of things about water and art working on this exhibition.
What a wonderful historical reference for your juxtaposition of the greater Boston area and South Asia in this exhibition. Can I follow up? Your opening section has pots. It has photos of women carrying water in jars on their heads, and it has actual pots, clay pots, jars. It's a rather surprising opening for an exhibition about stories and narrative. How do the pots tell water stories?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question, Kyo. So this is what I tell my students about the pots and water. It is really difficult to represent water in a visual narrative. A pot gives water that shape. Indian art traditionally leans heavily on figurative representation. I call this tendency in Indian art as abstraction through figuration, where about every concept, every divine being can be represented through figurative representation. When Ganga and Yamuna, the two rivers, are arriving to inaugurate a sacred site, they are represented as female figures riding their respective vehicles, Makara and Turtle, holding pots, and signaling that they are bringing sacred water for ablution. When the Buddha is born, celestial beings offer bath, and here again, these round-rimmed pots represent they're bringing the water to bathe the baby Buddha. Carrying water is caring for life, and a water pot can also signal the sociality around the water collecting and fetching, which is most often a woman's responsibility in many traditional societies. This round-rimmed pot signifies also auspiciousness in this cultural context in India. In this spherical shape, it may be likened to life-nourishing womb or cosmic egg in Indic mythology. And it is actually common to see what is called Purnagatta, the pot of plenty or plenitude, in ritual settings in sacred architecture as emblems of limitless fortunes, as my student Raghunath Akarsh explains in his entry for the pots. And you can read more about this on the exhibition website.
Yeah, thank you. And in the opening, it wonderfully scales immediately for the viewer, this vast amorphous entity of water for the viewer, right? For it's visceral, it's the body. It's only as much water as you can carry in this pot. Now, you mentioned figuration. South Asian visual traditions, as you say, are particularly notable for the way water is personified in myriad ways. You've arrayed a wonderful group of Indian miniature paintings that demonstrate this. So what do the various personifications of water that you display tell us about the kind of cultural mythology of water, if you will, in South Asia?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Hugh. I would say rivers are personified as female, not like water is, not necessarily water is personified, but rivers are personified as female, as in Goddess Ganga, Goddess Yamuna. And rivers are understood to be auspicious, purifying, and life-giving. I mean, water is auspicious, purifying, life-giving, but it can also be a place of darkness. like one of the one of the pieces in the exhibition, Hussein's Mahabharata series in the exhibition, tells a story of the epic Mahabharata's hero, Yudhishthira, encountering Yaksha, a semi-divine sort of protector figure of a lake, who Hussein turns into Yama, the Lord of Death, or the God of Death, so in the water. So you will see this painting in the exhibition. But I'll tell this story. The story goes that they were the five brothers who are the heroes of the Mahabharata were very, very thirsty, and Yudhishthira, the eldest, sends his younger brothers in search of water, and one by one go in search of water, but none of them return. So he went himself and saw this beautiful water, which he approached to drink hastily. But then he saw all his brothers dead in front of it. And then he heard the Yaksha warning him, before taking the water, he needs to answer all questions. Otherwise, he will face the same fate as the other four brothers. So Yudhishthira agrees to answer all of Yaksha's questions and eventually wins back the lives of his brothers. This story also signals water is sort of where life cycles end and begin. Of course, Yaksha's warning to heed his voice before just taking the water gives a sense of being mindful of nature. Nature is not as a resource to extract. The water is not a resource to extract, but something to respect and embrace carefully. So I'm not really answering your question straight away, but I think that kind of gives a sense of cultural sort of mythologies around the concept of water.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful. And the objects that you chose have myriad ways of personifying, embodying water, but also kind of depicting water as is, as a kind of abstract pattern or color. And your color happens to be one of your other major research interests. And you've been involved in some research on the materiality of the paintings and how actually the color of water is represented, what it's made up of. Does that tell you anything? Does that give you any further insight into maybe the specificity of water and river representation in these traditions?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Yes, I am color obsessed, and I do run this digital humanities project called Mapping Color in History. And for this exhibition's objects in the Harvard Art Museums, I did ask, and we worked with the conservation scientists in the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies, and Dr. Kathy Ehrman actually sort of kindly looked at all the miniature paintings that are in the exhibition. And because I was asking her, like, can you tell me, like, what is this water actually made of? What we think of water, preschool, like when you have to color the water with a crayon, you just often go for blue. And I'm wearing blue top to say, like, yay, it's a water story. But that's not always the case. That's, what color should be the water in art is actually not universal. It's again very specific, culturally specific, period specific. And I think what we find in these sort of objects that we have examined, and especially the ones in the exhibition, in comparison to the ones that are actually made for courts in Islamic world, where you do see silver being used, and they were really conscious about representing this reflective nature of water, it seems. Whereas in the paintings that we have, most of them, actually the 3 18th century paintings, all use just the lead white and plain old soot. So the black, carbon black, instead of, it's not like they didn't have access to precious metals. They actually did have access to gold, silver. It uses a lot of precious pigments to paint these brilliant colors, yet they didn't actually lean on silver to represent water. And that tells me something about sort of different approach to thinking about water as more natural, more like, as part of the sort of life around that is represented in the painting. So I think it's quite a different approach. But then if you look at this 19th century painting of the goddess Ganga, that water actually start using a different type of pigment. So it's again period specific, culturally specific, and I think we do learn a lot about how people, at least artists, were thinking about how to actually represent water and what that means by
Yeah.
sort of comparison.
Well, the materials are also very much localized. And in keeping with this idea of the kind of, you might say, ephemerality of water and its to some extent its specificity and neutrality at the same time, I'm seeing Evelyn Rydz's installation behind you, which really, among other things, demonstrates this remarkably. And I think nothing can replace actually walking around this image. And I wanted to ask Meg if you could say a few words about, first of all, just the objecthood of the installation overflow, and talk a little bit about how this Evelyn Rydz's use of materials in this installation connects to the theme of narrative and water stories.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Thank you. Outflux is composed of photographs that are printed on paper and then pieced together to simulate the flow of water across the gallery floor. But in fact, actually from the top of the gallery and then into the space. And so it has a visceral feel that you are encountering a body and a body of water. And I think significantly, actually listening to you talk about the difference between using the carbon black versus the reflective nature of silver, that the photographs picture the surfaces of bodies of water. And these are from across the Americas, ranging from rivers and tributaries in the Boston area where Evelyn lives and works, but also to the coasts of Colombia and Cuba, which are regions from where her family is from. So this like picturing of water is reflecting up. We see different colors all come together, but they're visibly torn and made into waves. And so you get this sense of the shape of water. It looks frozen in space. You have this sense of crashing into the gallery and then out into 10 feet where it pools. But I would actually say that the movement of the water is not calm, is not necessarily pooling, that in my eyes, it has a restless quality. And I think that in that, I know that Evelyn is touching upon larger histories of migration, immigration, trade, industry, and certainly climate, as we can see in some other of the works that are in the exhibition.
See, thank you. I mean, that just conveys the multivalence of what the installation does in kind of centering water as a subject, as a subject in itself. And that reminds me of, eco-critical commentary such as that of Timothy Morton's Hyperobject, where he talks about motifs, things that have not been accorded the ontological status of a thing in many systems of representation, like water, like wind, like the ether itself. And that brings me to the remarkable film in the gallery by Alia Farid, Chibayish, and the way it kind of, you might say, the way it addresses some of the hyperobject themes that are otherwise invisible. And Meg, actually, could you just describe the film for us and talk a little bit about some of its points of emphasis? Yeah,
I would love to. So I've known about Alia's film, and we got this very recent edit of Chibayish. And so it's in process, and we have like a moment on view. And not until you get into the gallery do you really understand how works interact with each other and how they create meaning. And Chibayish is installed directly across from this wave. And unlike Evelyn's wave, her film is very specific about the waters. This is Chibayish. It's centered in the Hamar marshes, which is pardon my poor pronunciations of some of these words, but this is part of a set of interconnected wetlands, the Ahwar, as they're known in Iraq, and the largest wetland ecosystem in West Asia. So it is a film that discusses the interconnected histories. Well, it's about the interconnected histories of Iraq and Kuwait, histories of the people, colonialism, of accessing water and oil in the region. And this is underpinned by the story of US militarism and intervention. However, that is not like what you see. What you see in the film is the beauty of the reeded passageways that open up into lagoons. It's populated in Alia's film by young people who live there with their families and the water buffalo. And the view from the camera to the people and the water buffalo and the reeds and the water is very, very intimate. And you can you hear children sing and dance, work, play, and tell stories. And you can hear the water sloshing around the bodies and the boats. Again, there's laughter and particular calls that are made to call out to the buffalo. And to connect this to stories, there's also stories that are being told of a distressed water buffalo who becomes trapped in mud. And the water is receded and left that creature stranded. And it feels like a family member. Again, because the water, the subjects of the film, the people, I can't even say subjects because you have a sense of a family. And that buffalo is helped out by the storyteller and their family. And there's another story about grief around the loss of a buffalo. And in this way, like there's narrative in action, but really what you're feeling is images of the reeds, tenderness. You see the camera sits on the face of a child. And so you have this specificity, this world, and the water is not just the setting of the world, it is the world. And I think that this is the difference. We also have the sound, which is informing all of the work that is within the gallery. And so when you're talking about like water as a thing, like putting it into, I think Evelyn's does a great job, like showing water, and it's moving, but then you have this film that you're hearing water and you hear all of this life that goes on in the setting of water.
I'm so glad you mentioned the sound, because it really does kind of create this it makes the gallery even more environmental and immersive. You might say immersive, much like Atul Bhalla's slow submergence of the artist into the water through the 14 serial photographs that are such a striking part of the show as well. Well, we're now going to have a chance to look again at some of the images from the exhibition, Water Stories, River Goddesses, Ancestral Rites, and Climate Crisis. Hopefully the images will mean that much more to the viewers after this brief discussion. And after the slideshow, we'll move to audience questions. one of the things as the questions come in and I'm taking a look at them, there's an interesting comment about the so-called single source of much Asian river flow, Tibet, on a plateau, kind of catalyzing circulation all throughout the periphery. So what is the relationship between what we might call the unity or ubiquity of water and some of its real particularity in the various exhibits of the show? I mean, we have very specific places, we have very specific personifications of rivers, and so there's a theme, there is a one might say a dialogue between connectedness and specificity. I'm trying not to use the phrase local and global, but Jinah, could you address some of how this plays out in the course of the show?
Thank you for that question. Yes, it's. I think the particularity or locality and the sort of universality of water as a theme kind of plays out in the gallery pretty remarkably, I would say, as you already mentioned, that we do have these very specific rivers that we're addressing with the representations in the form of goddess or where the works are actually from. And then I think Evelyn's work in particular, this amazing water, flowing water, because her goal is to connect the waters and ultimately the rivers all connect. I mean, all waters in the globe are connected. Like there's like no question of connection, even if it's so far off. But then it gets also culturally very specific, right? So I do think that we do see them kind of coming together in that middle, but also sort of the particularities are all on display in the works that you see. So I don't know if I have a good answer to the question of like, what about the rivers up in the Himalayas, like up in the Tibetan plateau? But what I find really fascinating in the works that we have selected, especially when I'm talking about mythologies, is the way in which mythologies actually do manifest sort of geological and geographical sort of sense of space and time. So the story of Descent of Ganges, for instance, on Shiva's lock of hair, and Shiva's supposed to be up in the Kailas mountain, that is in the sort of Tibetan plateau. It goes into like above the Himalayas or deep into the Himalayan range. And it, in a way, and that the river, because she was so arrogant as a celestial river, is asked to come down on his hair. And Shiva, as a sort of ascetic figure, has his matted hair that has like trailed down of the hair locks, and the river goddess like jumping off the like heaven into his hair, and she's like supposed to be lost and actually get like this to come down the trails of hair, and that is an image that you can also see on the NASA map of the Earth, that the rivers are coming down from the mountains in these like little tributaries. And it's really remarkable for me to imagine this as a mythological story that's really aware of the environment and sort of the climate conditions of the Earth. So,
well, this is where Hussein's seragraphs are interesting, because they represent on the one hand a continuation of the telling of the myths of the water myths of South Asia, among other things. But he's a modern artist, a very prominent modern artist, a kind of cubistic painter of the mid-20th century. And implied, is it fair to say that implied in your curation, and this is kind of collating several questions about the myths and their continuity from the audience, that it's implied that the era of myth is kind of over, and the stories that we tell about water have receded or diminished in the era of the climate crisis, which has redefined water as a subject of crisis, you might say. And so Hussein is an interesting question point, but it's in dialogue with, for example, the photo, the 1907, 8, 9 photo of Pittsburgh, that is so striking as a kind of a desolate water-stricken, drought-stricken a land, a kind of, even a picture of a dystopic future. All this documentary. Can you comment? Is that a fair characterization that we have to revalorize the myths of the age of myth has faded in a certain sense?
I think the age of myth is faded in a certain sense, but bringing Hussein and in conversation with other works in this exhibition, I keep thinking that there is power to those stories, and I think there is a reimagining and rereading of these stories from sort of ecological and environmentally conscious and sort of climate conscious ways will actually bring like new insights. So it might be just good old stories of like, Lord Shiva saves the day, but I think there is so much more to those stories, and I think there is something to be learned from what these stories bring in terms of sort of climate and environment consciousness of our time that's needed. And I really do mean to really cultivate climate empathy through telling these stories.
Thank you. Well, that connects to some of the other questions that have come in. One is a very, I think, thoughtfully framed question, very general one, about how ancient water crises were outside of one's control, while humans have a direct impact on current climate crises in the age of the Anthropocene. How has this impacted the portrayal of water in art? Is there a way that this can be kind of addressed through the flow chart of water stories?
Well, that's a really good way to think about the current sort of situation that we're in, anthropogenic climate crisis and climate change, and sort of what art does. And I have to sort of mention how I'm thinking about the whole sort of climate change issues through the lens of sort of reading Amitabh Ghosh's A Great Derangement, and that was such a influential book for me to think through, and I have read that several times, and like every time I find something interesting to pick up from, and from there I do think it's something to be said about pre-modern and like pre-industrial civilization sort of societies had a very different relationship with water and natural resources, and climate crisis wasn't really climate crisis necessarily. It's like, water, as you were saying, Kyo, earlier, about how water is now like only sort of interacted with and talked about in the mode of crisis. And I think that's also, there is a step back that needs to be taken to think of this relationship differently, and that's where I think art really does something profoundly different than thinking about really climate solutions that are very technical, very mechanically driven, and very scientifically driven. All of these are needed, but I think ultimately the attitude about and understanding of the nature and the human nature relationship, I think, is really fundamentally important to consider in this age of anthropogenic climate crisis, and art really does play an important role in that.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, when I think about artists like Alia, Atul, and Evelyn, is that they are working with materials, working with communities, and using the materials that they have available to think about particular communities, and that we do know that through action that happens in small community has impact and prepares folks for what is coming, or has political impact on the communities there, and that it takes many disciplines in order to not just technological or political or agricultural systems to change, and that local politics and getting the word out about that, or working on systems that happen from Indigenous communities, has an impact. And I think of artists, particularly the artists included in this exhibition, as doing that very intentionally.
Thank you. The juxtaposition of the works by the artists that you've been mentioning and some of the works that have been borrowed from the Harvard Art Museums and other collections is really striking. And several of the guests have asked, and because we are on an online event, I think it's appropriate maybe to ask you to say more about what you hope visitors will feel, learn, experience after they've spent some time in the gallery physically. So what changes when you're physically in the gallery, in encounter with these works?
Well, thank you. And I think this was also, like, for me, such an exciting moment when I finally got to see the exhibition, all the objects that I've been sort of struggling with, trying to put together, trying to like make sense of. And because from the very beginning, I knew this was also tall order to juxtapose all these artworks and objects. So, but it really it was so remarkable how it came together. And it's just the space and they're talking to each other, and you actually start seeing connections that I didn't actually see sitting and only image by image or virtually on like studying only one at a time. It just together they really talk to each other. They tell stories that I didn't anticipate, and also the space actually, with the Evelyn's work and the Alia's work kind of bookending the space, it really does create this. Water in an art gallery is a hard thing to do. I really thought about actually having actual water in the gallery, but that's was no. So, but like short of that, I think these works really do an amazing job of these contemporary pieces, kind of with the Atul Bhalla on Sir As You Go In, really a striking kind of juxtaposition. And these smaller works from the past are really kind of particulars of the narrative, and then it kind of creates this flow that makes you, I'm hoping, think about your own relationship with water. And I really want people to kind of learn these stories and learn to read them differently as you come into the space. And yeah, the sound, the lighting, the ambience, I think that's all quite different than you seeing it one by one virtually.
Well, let me rephrase that question for Meg, because one of the striking things about this exhibition is that it's not a quick exhibition. It requires a certain mode of attention, attention that is actually manifest in some of the works themselves, like Evelyn Rydz's installation and the pace of Alia Farid's film, and then just the close looking that's required of Indian miniature painting. You don't kind of, you don't rush by those works. Could you say a little bit about that apparent synchronicity, Meg?
Yes, and I think that has something to do with how the visitor is going to be coming into the gallery, and it will take a while to look and to connect and to think about these stories. And I think that artists, I think that there is a well of attention that is happening on both sides of viewing the work and taking it in and thinking about it. And what the artist has done is that an artist first develops their skills and then makes their work. And it's a long period of time for an artist to think and make whatever way it is. With Evelyn and some other works that are pictured, actually, they're kind of hidden behind Jinah's head. There's two drawings that are made so finely with colored pencil and they absolutely connect with the miniature painting that you see. And that I think that these in close proximity and the looking that is required to think about it and to even just understand the detail also creates an attention that has been already given into the work by the artist. And so in a gallery such as this, as we have many different kinds of photography that are happening in the gallery as well. And so that's the kind of attention that we hope brings out also people's stories, and then starts thinking about their life with water. And I think that is present in this space. So book a full hour.
May I also add there that I think this really kind of provides a space for contemplation, and that's like all the work kind of require that, and it's book an hour like at least. I think it's a good idea, like really be able to take the time, kind of become part of the exhibition, part of the story, and that's what I as a curator would love to see happening.
Well, there's a remarkable way in which you're pulled out of your own chaotic rhythm into the rhythm of the exhibition, of the rhythm of water, of cycles, of waves of the world, of connectivity, is really uncanny. Final question. This is asked by several in the audience. One work that you would highlight as a special work, work that's your favorite in the show. Or one work that you feel maybe one of the works that we haven't actually had a chance to say much about, that you would particularly hope the visitor dwells over.
It's hard.
I'm like, that's a hard question. I'm like, I can't believe this is a final question because I cannot play favorites here.
You know what? I can point out one work that is in the cluster of carrying water. It's almost all photographs, and they're arrayed around those jars, but one of them is a painting, and it is very small, and it has this beautiful color pink to it, and it's something that I may have missed, or I wouldn't have missed because we're curating the show, but I would have missed because it requires careful looking to see it, because she is amongst a group of photographs of women who have jars, and she's different. And I've kind of thought of that as a little guide in some ways, because it is both picturing, documenting, but also is something that was painted. So that would be not my favorite, because I can't do that, but one to pay attention to. Look for it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Right at the beginning of the show. Although that's a wonderful place to conclude our program today. So I want to thank Jinah and Meg for your thoughtful conversation, and our audience for their great questions. Registration to visit the Water Stories River Goddesses, Ancestral Rites, and Climate Crisis exhibition is now open. Can be accessed through the Radcliffe website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. Now, the exhibition is free and open to the public through December 16th, 2023. Advanced registration is encouraged before visiting all Radcliffe exhibitions. We also encourage you to attend coming events associated with the exhibition. These are really great, so don't miss them. A program of panel discussions on Friday, October 13th, a gallery tour with artist Atul Bhalla with the sequence of 14 serial photographs in the exhibition on Saturday, October 14th, an art making program with artist Evelyn Rydz, the maker of the specially commissioned installation in the gallery on Saturday, November 18th, and a tour with artist Alia Farid, who's also an artist in residence at Radcliffe, on Friday, December 8th. Finally, today's program has been recorded and will be posted in about a week. For information about upcoming Radcliffe programs, including those I just mentioned, and to see videos of past events, please visit radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today, and take care.